7 keys of profitable investment. All right, predictable results, okay? So that's ultimately what it's about. So when we are talking about the leverage is using a mortgage in order to leverage, that's in order to leverage the bank's money for your investment. Okay, that's really what we're talking about, is whether you want to buy the property in cash or whether you want to buy it in with leverage, which is using the mortgage money. So the use of mortgage funds to reduce out-of-pocket expenses. Cap rate and appreciation, plus appreciation, lower rate, and then the mortgage rate equals negative leverage. If we've got cap rate plus appreciation and the rate is higher than the mortgage rate, then it's positive leverage. So let's get into some examples.
You just need the cap rate to exceed the mortgage interest.
Mm-hmm. So if we've got a cap rate at 3%, which is very low performing, right? And then we've got appreciation at 2%, which is also very low performing, but we're taking on a mortgage rate at 6%, then we're going to be in a negative leverage situation.
Negative 1% each year.
Mm-hmm. If we are at a 3% rate and 3% cap rate and 3% appreciation, and our mortgage rate is significantly lower, then we're going to be in a positive leverage situation. 3.5% cap rate, 1% appreciation, once again, negative leverage. And then calculating rate of return. So rate of return is the measure of the financial performance of any investment. Number one is going to be cash on cash rate of return, and then internal rate of return. We're going to break these down. Okay, the one that you're looking for the IRR is going to, it says Happy Investor Condotel, 456 Waikiki Lane.
You have the print. You have the print on your print, please. Underneath that.
Oh, you did? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Good job, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn. Glenn's the best. Let's give him a round of applause, you guys. Glenn is the best. Okay, so we are looking for Happy Investor Condotel. And I chose this as an example because what does every single out-of-state buyer call you and say?
I want to get an Airbnb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
yeah, 100,000.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at it from the standpoint of calculating internal rate of return. If you're buying a condotel in Waikiki, and let's say step one, going along with the steps that we just did, purchase price $500,000. Okay. Down payment 25% down. So you can get a short-term rental at 25% down at minimum. When we are talking about short-term rentals, what are the different types of short-term rentals?
30 days.
30 days. So 30 days or less would be considered a short-term rental, okay? But as far as the units go, when we're talking about STRs, there are the ones that are 300 square feet, above 300 square feet with full kitchens. What makes up a full kitchen?
Yeah, water, heat, refrigerator.
Say it again.
It's the sink, the stove, and the refrigerator.
Okay, sink, stove, and refrigerator. However, what does a stove need to be? How many burners?
2.
4.
Oh, really? For a full kitchen. If it's 2, it's a wet bar or something? How do they do that?
It's not a full kitchen. It's not a full kitchen. We'll get to that in a second, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because wet bar is 2 out of 3.
So hold on. We'll get to it in 1 second. Okay. So we've got the stove. We've got the cooking element. Okay. We've got the water, and then we've got the refrigerator. Okay. The stove, if it's a full, by definition of STR, so once again, STRs are different from single-family residences, okay? Technically, a single-family residence doesn't need any appliances at all, okay? we don't care about the appliances on $1 million single family residence. What we care about is the collateral itself. The appliances are a couple grand, right? But when you're dealing with a STR, the kitchen becomes very relevant. And so it's not just that you have to have 3 elements, it's that the full kitchen definition generally is that the property, and I misspoke, I said 500 square feet minimum, has to have a full kitchen, including 4 burners, an oven, okay? So it's gotta be a full stove with the 4 burners and the oven. And it also has to have water outside of the bathroom, because most folks will say, well, I got a sink in the bathroom. Isn't that my water element? No, it's got to be outside of the bathroom. And your refrigerator has to be a full-sized refrigerator. It cannot be one of those little refrigerators, okay? If any of those things are missing, then it doesn't meet traditional condotel guideline. Okay?
Makes sense.
Once we get into a lesser condotel guideline, so remember, whenever we're talking about guidelines, it's how many lenders will do it, right? When you're up here, 500 square feet with a full kitchen, you're going to be looking at many lenders that will be doing it. But you're also looking at buildings that are probably 800,000-900,000, right? The Ilokai Marina, some of those guys,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Those are going to be 500 more square feet, full kitchens, most of them, and all of that stuff, because they've got room, okay? Then the next bracket is going to be smaller condotels, but without the full kitchen. So now they're going to get into nitty gritty. Like, is it a two range stove, but no oven? Some of those little nuances. Then it's going to be 300 square feet or more, and then it's going to be, kind of a cut and paste as far as the elements that you have. Okay, but you're going to have those 3 elements. Once you get into a full lodging unit, those are the ones that don't have anything, right? They just got that little hot plate or the microwave, maybe a little refrigerator like that, what have you, right? And those are going to get very specific. A common building, that's also going to dictate the price. Okay, why is the Ilokai 800,000? Because you can get financing on that. You don't have to buy it in cash, right? You can just get financing on it. Somebody name a building that nobody wants to lend in.
Hawaiian Monarch?
Hawaiian Monarch, yeah. So many lenders won't lend in Hawaiian Monarch, but it's not challenging to get lending there. There's actually a few lenders that will work through that. Ala Moana Hotel, right? Why in the world are those units with those views going for less than 200,000?
Because they have a full kitchen.
It's maintenance, but they're true lodging units, and nobody can get financing.
Yeah.
So if you're a cash-only building, which we do, we're closing a bunch in Ala Moana Hotel right now, but if you don't have lending capability in there and you're calling for all cash buyers or virtually all cash buyers, then you're going to have a tougher time offloading those buildings.
Yeah.
And that goes right back to what we were talking about, property value, right? You would think that the Ala Moana Hotel with restaurants downstairs and signature upstairs and escalators and the mall right next door and all of these amenities that it has, doesn't it feel like the units should be going for more, right? But they're not. I think we contracted one upstairs, 179,000, right?
It's probably that many square feet too. 179. Right there.
And many of them are.
Yeah.
But those are true lodging units, and some of them don't have any cooking elements at all. They've just got the little refrigerator, if that. Okay?
Yeah.
And then no outside wet bar or any of that stuff. Did that answer your question?
So my follow-up question would be, for the different tiers of how you guys are doing the, short-term rentals, say, versus one that's 300 square feet has no, maybe like a mini fridge, and one that's just purely lodging, how much is the difference in the down payment, or what are the differences as far as how hard is it to loan from one tier to the next? Like, what would I tell my investor? Oh, you need this much down because this is 300 square feet and it only has a mini fridge and da-da-da-da. Or you need this much down because it's at least 500 square feet, has a full kitchen, 4-burner stove and an oven, da-da-da-da.
So Depending, a lot of it will depend, it's building specific. So to answer your question, there is no blanket answer.
Okay.
So as you as a real estate agent, your prompt would be,
Let's connect to
there
the
is
agent."
so much crazy stuff going on with STRs and lodging units. So the reality of it is I need to have you talk to a loan officer.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's going to be your default.
Okay.
But the reality of it is if you are in that kind of, qualifying condotel realm, you're looking at 25 to 30%. The Ala Moana hotels right now are going at 40 to 50%. And they're not getting 30-year fixed or 30-year loans. They're getting like 3 to 5 year loans because nobody wants to be involved in a building with 179 square feet lodging unit with that exposure. Because the other thing is you have to remember that amenities that we may think are very positive, like having a restaurant at the top that with the most beautiful views in the whole universe, but what does that restaurant serve? Alcohol. What happens when people go down that escalator after they've been drinking at Signature all night long? And then if they fall on that escalator, who's paying for it? Signature or the Ala Moana Hotel?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if somebody goes to Signature and they hit happy hour super hard and they fall down that escalator, that's going to hit the building's liability insurance. Okay? So that's why that building is technically undesirable from an investment standpoint. There's too much risk.
So your 25% down loan with the 600 minimum credit that you have the flyer in here is technically the loan that we're talking about right now. Yeah.
So that's going to be specific, but yes. So we do have a lender. In our flyer, we've got the fast and easy, 25% down, 600 FICO. So that lender will do any building, regardless of lodging unit or not, as long as the name of the building doesn't have the word hotel in it. So if it's the Pacific Monarch,
Right.
no problem.
That's fine.
Ala Moana Hotel,
No.
bueno.
Right.
But we can use a different lender for that. They're just going to require more down payment.
How long is the loan? Is it 5 years?
The one that we're talking about
Right
there
now,
is
yeah.
3 years. I'm sorry,
So the
30
25
years.
okay, the 25%
Fast and Easy,
down minimum, yeah.
The program itself, Fast and Easy,
30
is a
years.
30-year fix.
Wonderful.
Off to the side, your company, do you guys look at zoning for STRs? Does it play?
Yes, it always comes into play. So, so we're not going to help you break the law. Is basically the way that works.
Right.
So when the appraisal comes in, he's going to tell us what is eligible for what. And then depending upon the program that we're using, we may or may not be able to use the income from the property in order to help you qualify.
Yeah, because you know what? Because Ala Moana Hotel and Executive Center, they are grandfathered into the STRs, right? But the zoning is not resort.
But the appraiser would note that. Yep. So just like when you have a residential appraisal and it's got an illegal ohana, and then the appraiser will note that this property, this neighborhood is grandfathered in for the ohana. So you couldn't build a new one, but you could have one now. If it was
You want
grandfathered.
abandoned that
they're
sold
te-
overnight.
What is it? They have a
They're
term for it. It's
licensed.
Yeah.
Non-conforming.
Yeah,
Short-term
non-converted.
Yeah. Did that answer everybody's question? Ashley?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
we got a good thing going on.
Cool. All right.
do.
So yeah, so when it comes to STRs, there is so many nuances that even as a loan officer, we cannot keep track of everything. We've got to keep a spreadsheet for what goes where. And then because of the kind of, for lack of a better word, undesirability when it comes to the condotels and short-term rentals. And the main reason for that is, what does an invest? So who's gonna take care of their property better? A owner-occupied person living in that unit, or an investor who bought the unit putting a tenant in? Who's gonna take care of the property more?
Depends.
Yeah,
Depends on the
the
owner.
person with the tenant may want to continue to keep their rents up, right?
Yeah.
Good property manager take care of the property.
That's right. Generally, because of pride of ownership, folks that are living in the property are going to take better care of the property than folks that are not living in the property because they have no skin in the game, right? When we take a look, and let's get off of the STRs for a second, but let's talk about traditional condominiums. When we are purchasing a condominium and you get your condominium docs, on your RR 105C, one of those items is what is your owner occupancy ratio?
Right.
Why is that important?
Because owners tend to take care.
Owners have a tendency to take care, okay? So when your owner occupancy ratio is too low, what happens?
Then they're gonna know it's full of investors, and they're probably not gonna want a loan on it.
Yeah,
No, they can
well,
ask for higher down
so
payment.
Yeah.
so two things. So you're partially right. So when we have an owner occupied, a low owner occupancy ratio, and we're talking about a traditional residential building, and we're going for like a Fannie Mae loan or what have you, then if it is primary residence or second home, the owner occupancy is waived. So it could be 0 or 1 if your unit's going to be the one that's going to owner occupy. It could be, it's waived. It doesn't carry any credence as long as you're going for traditional conventional loan. If you're an investor, however, it comes under full condo review, and then like you said, if it's deemed that they don't want to do that, the risk is too high, they're going to ask for more down payment, interest rate's going to go up, portfolio loan, all that stuff.
What do you think, Judy? An investor may take care of the unit, but they're not going to vote on annual meetings and whatnot. They're not going to care about the building.
Maybe not. You know, once again, it goes back to the owner and how involved they want to be. You know, and we've got certain buildings where the board works great, and we've got a lot of buildings where the board doesn't work great. What's a building right across from Ala Moana, next door to Inspiration, that has a ton of problems?
Moana Pacific. Hidden litigations forever.
Moana
Nobody can loan on
Pacific.
it.
Yes.
Well, Bank of Hawaii can loan on it.
Yeah, it's actually, there's a lot of lenders that can lend loan on it. But what I did hear is that they've got a couple of board openings right now, and there's a bunch of owners right now that are in there like throwing big parties and big barbecues, and they're campaigning and they're trying to get people's votes in order to get on that board, because the current board right now has had such control over the building, and they can do things like use the money fraudulently, right? Use the reserve monies fraudulently. A way to do that would be, well, it happens everywhere, right? This is going to be an $18 million project. Hey, why don't we get it done by my brother? He's going to make it cheaper for everybody. Okay, so they get their brother to underbid. And then what the board doesn't see is one of those line items is $2 million to my brother who set me up with the board, right? So there's embezzlement opportunities when they're on the board by contracting their friends or family to do the work, even though they may or may not be bidding correctly or the best person for the job, right? They're giving preference to other folks. The other thing that they do is they get into lawsuits with each other or with the other tenants, right? How many of us have seen a litigation where they're like, the board member got in a fight with a tenant and the dog bit them, and then now they're all in a lawsuit, you know, like every single thing that you can imagine, and everyone is sue happy when it comes to these things, and if they see an opportunity, they're going to go after that board member, or the board member is going to retaliate, or whatever the case may be. In fact, I think that they just issued a new law, I was just hearing about it, where they're going to hold the board specifically responsible for any of the deferred maintenance that has not been addressed.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so, and everybody knows that this is all driving from Florida, right? The building that fell down and crashed down. And then, especially here in Hawaii, we're having all of those insurance problems because what do we have in Maui?
Yeah.
Fires that burned down a ton of buildings, right?
Replacement costs.
Yep. So because of that, now did everybody see my webinar a couple of weeks ago with Sue Savio?
Yeah.
Glenn, we'll send that out to them after, okay? So Sue Savio, as you know, the president of Insurance Associates, she maintains the insurance policies on the majority of the buildings here in Hawaii. And I think the last list that came out, there was like 500 buildings that were exposed, many of them, of course, being here in Oahu, okay? Because we have the most buildings here. And what's going on is that many of the buildings are operating at very slim reserves. What are building reserves? Your savings account,
Yeah.
right? Your savings account. Just like at your normal home, if your plumbing goes out, if you don't have the 10 grand to fix your plumbing, who's going to pay for that? Okay? So same thing with these buildings. They don't have enough reserves. Either they weren't increasing the maintenance fees well enough, or they were embezzling the monies, or they were using the monies in other directions, but they were not doing what they needed to do to maintain the deferred maintenance in the building. So then their different things became old. And here in Hawaii, the majority of the buildings were built between the 70s and the 90s, okay? So all of our buildings are 30 years old or more. How long is a roof good for?
30 years.
30 years. How long is your plumbing good for? 30 years. Everything is about 30 years. So when you've got all of these buildings that are well over 30 years, what does that affect?
Everything.
Your insurance, okay? It affects your insurance. So with that being said, when these buildings were reevaluated for their deferred maintenance and their insurance policies came up for renewal, they were like, well, we can't renew you unless you do your plumbing. It's over 30 years old. And then they'll be like, well, we don't have $30 million to do our plumbing. And they'll be like, well, then you don't get any insurance. Ha ha, good luck getting a loan, right? So it's the chicken or the egg. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in. And then we just did, well, I'll get to you one second. And we just did a webinar with Sue Savio on it. And so because it was such a big situation, obviously here in Hawaii, it's still happening. There's many lenders that won't even lend in those buildings. And it's what we call the hurricane sublimit problem, that many of the buildings are underinsured. So if the buildings burn to the ground, they couldn't rebuild them. They don't have enough money. And the insurance company won't cover it. So from a lending standpoint, and from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's standpoint, they don't want to buy in that. They don't want to lend in that building. What if it does burn down? What are you going to do then? And Hawaii does not have a great track record, right? We had Maui, we had the Monte Carlo. Most of our buildings don't even have, smoke detectors. Go ahead.
So Cal was sharing with me exactly that you guys can't loan on like a building like 909 Kapiolani because of their insurance policy.
No, we can.
Well,
but most lenders won't.
Yeah, most lenders can't. You're right.
Yeah.
But it was because of the insurance clause, the replacement cost. The replacement cost was just not there in the insurance policy to be able to cover how much it would be.
Yeah.
So that's why we ended up, I was representing the seller. So thankfully the buyer that we brought in was doing an assumption. So we didn't have to deal with it.
Perfect.
Yeah, so that was a good way that we kind of went around that. But I didn't even realize that was a thing, that if the replacement cost doesn't cover, at least then most people won't know.
Yeah, so it goes back to what happens in the event of a catastrophe, right? I mean, the reality of it is nobody wants to go into foreclosure. That's the last straw. Nobody wants the place to burn down. That's the last straw. But what is real life like, right? It's like a Beatles song, right? Everything happens while you're making plans. So the reality of it is nobody wanted the Monte Carlo to have that problem, but it did. Nobody wanted Maui to burn to the ground, but it did, right? So these are the things that lenders have to take a look at. And when you've had a lot of catastrophes, which Hawaii has recently, that's just no bueno for insurance companies. And then on top of that, just like, we don't have all of the different choices when it comes to anything else, right? Car dealerships, cable providers. How many people in this room have Cox Communication as their cable provider? Nobody! Because everybody has Spectrum.
Yeah, Telecom.
Or Hawaiian Telecom if you're willing to take a chance.
Yeah, get the two.
Well, I got Telecom.
I do too.
They are cheaper. But they're slower. Okay.
What is Monte Carlo? What was the issue?
I'm sorry, the Marco Polo. Marco
We know
Polo.
what you meant.
Marco Polo, that's what I meant. I'm so sorry, not the
She's
Monte
thinking
Carlo.
of gambling.
I'm thinking about Vegas, so let's take the Vegas. No.
We knew what you meant.
I'm so sorry, the Marco Polo. But same thing, right? That building, if you get the right side of the building, that has incredible views. But because of what happened, people died, things, went astray. So yeah, buildings, very exciting. So we'll send you the webinar that we did with Sue Savio just a couple of weeks ago. It was extremely eye-opening. And for anybody that owns a condo, it made me cry just a little bit. And I think I pooped my pants a little bit, like just a little bit, not enough to create a problem, but just a little bit. But it will scare you to death. Because
I
the
went back
reality
and
of
looked
it
at my
is,
hurricane insurance through Zephyr. the projected policy is supposed to initiate in March. Double.
Yes.
The
Yes.
premium is double.
No.
Yes.
So I went on the hunt and found another company.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Alex
trying
is
to
good.
buy,
You
imagine
went
thinking
to
about
Alex?
buying.
Yeah.
Did you
You
switch
already
Well,
know, but
Did you go
imagine-
Yeah, I switched.
So one of the things,
Yeah.
so this year I'm the president of the Hawaii Association of Mortgage Brokers, and for many years we really haven't had. And I also run the legislative committee, which is why we did the webinar. But you know, for the last few years, we really haven't had anything to lobby in, Washington D.C. for. But this year in April, I'll be going, and the message that I'm bringing is two things. There is a situation happening with loan officers coming to Hawaii that are unlicensed, and then they're performing all these crazy transactions, so they're putting homeowners in bad situations. But on top of that, the most pressing issue is affordable housing, which ultimately is the hurricane issue. Because who is really buying these condos? The first-time home buyers, right? So
Yeah.
now you're putting them in a position where they can't get a Fannie Mae Freddie Mac loan, which is the 5% down with mom's help, all that stuff. Now they've got to take on these portfolio loans, which is 25, 30%
That's
down.
crazy.
And they're a first-time home buyer, and how are you going to come up with all of that money
Yeah.
if you're trying to get into a property, first time?
Yeah.
So these are the many, many, many problems that are happening in Hawaii. And Sue Savio's take on it was, when they asked her, what is the solution? She's like, there really is none right now. You kind of got to the insurance companies have given the buildings, you've got to upgrade your deferred maintenance or fix your deferred maintenance problems, or else we're not going to give you the 100% coverage. And then those buildings are having to go out and hit the owners with assessments and increased maintenance fees. And then from there, see where you're at, right? And then reevaluate. And then the other thing that they're trying to do is, going back to the spectrum question, okay, is there's only a few companies that are actually offering insurance here in Hawaii, especially to these large buildings. So that's the other thing, right? Is making it a little bit more insurance friendly, so that we could have some more providers, so that, like you said, the buildings can go out and shop for their own insurance. I was actually at a board meeting for my building on Tuesday, and I looked at, I was examining their operating expenses, and they were spending $243,000 a year on insurance.
Wow.
$243,000 a year, and that was up from 153 the year before. Like, it almost doubled, like you said. And now it's happening on a building space. So that's why assessments and the maintenance fees are going up. And Sue Savio basically said the right thing, which is, the owners, you got to make the decision, right? If you're losing too much money, you can't handle it, or whatever the case may be, unfortunately, you've got to sell or get out of that building. But if you move into a new building, I'm going to sell this old building and I'm going to get into Ho'opili, then you get hit with something else. So where is that space, right? You just don't know. But if you can, just take a deep breath, work with your board in order to try to figure it out, attend your board meetings, and just prepare yourself for the higher maintenance fees and the higher costs, because inflation is real and it's hitting us on many spaces. And it's not just the buildings. It's also the single-family residence premiums are also going up. So anybody who has come up for renewal on their single-family residences, your insurance is also elevated. Ours, not so bad, but I was actually talking to my cousin in Florida, because that was where the building actually fell down. Their insurance premiums are so high, he said it's quadrupled. It went from $2,000 to $8,000 between 2023 and 2024. So
it's not just Hawaii.
it's not just Hawaii. It's the states that have, it's across the nation, number one, but it's the states that have realized some catastrophes recently, which we have had a lot. And when you watch that webinar, Sue Savio gives a bunch of statistics, and she said something and I forget what it was because it was a few weeks ago now, but she said something last year in Hawaii we had something 29 major catastrophes, and the normal number is 7. So it was so elevated. Yep.
Are we blaming the board or Hawaiian?
Well, it is, unfortunately, COVID played into some of that, right? The remote working played into some of that, meaning that before COVID, when everybody was going to work every day, during the day, your elevator maybe worked, 50 times that day. When everybody was home, the elevator worked 1,700 times that day. So that's going to break the elevator eventually. And when you have more people at home, they're using more stuff because it's not just the elevator breaking, it's the water bill went straight up, the electricity bill went straight up, the pool broke again, the this and this, you know what I mean? And then all that stuff on the shipping costs when they got to bring those parts in. So just everything, it's all around the board.
Rental rates went up.
And rental rates went up too. Yeah. In fact, I was planning on selling one of my condos because I was like, oh man, the maintenance fee is going up. It's rented a little too low. I know the guy in there. He's already given me trouble when I tried to raise his rent last time. In fact, I had to raise his rent. Then he sent me a letter that said, if it stays at this level, I'm going to find somewhere else. So I reduced his rent because who wants to go 3 months and look for another renter, right, and do all that stuff? I'm like, might as well take a couple $100 off and keep this guy in there. Military guy, he was doing great. And whenever I send the handyman in there, he'd be like, oh man, that guy's so clean. When you go in his bathroom, it's like toothpaste, comb, like everything is like at a 90-degree angle, and everything was just spotless. So I'm like, I'm keeping that guy in there. But I was going to sell one of my condos because of all these problems that were happening. But being in the industry, I know what the problems are when you're trying to sell with an assessment and all that stuff. And so my neighbor got a place at Ho'opili. And so when I opened my door one day, I looked out in the hallway and there was like 20 couples standing in the hallway. And so I texted him and I'm like, hey, are you trying to rent your place next door? He's like, yeah, I found a camp. The property manager should be there. I'm like, all these people must be there trying to rent this space. Well, when you put a condo on sale, you got 20 couples standing in the hallway waiting to get in? No, not happening when you sell it, but happening when you rent it. So what's happening to rent? As long as you fetch enough rent, as long as there's somebody to rent it, you're golden, right? So that's what happened. I said to myself, well, and then at the same time, it all happened out perfectly. That the tenant gave me his notice he was getting PCS. So I asked my neighbor, I'm like, how much are you renting your place for? And he gave me this number, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if I can rent it for that number, we're golden now. Now I'm not in a loss situation anymore. I'm at least breaking even. So the reality of it is rents are going up immensely. And a lot of it is because of these issues, right? The increased costs, the inflation, all of that different stuff. So if you can find a way to elevate your rent and break even, it's a good investment. If you are in a major loss situation, that's not sustainable over time. Maybe it is, right? I read an article that said that, Ellis that owns Lanai, I read an article that said that he didn't even know that he owned it for like a few years. Because when you're that rich, you don't even know what's on your balance sheet. And he's, Ellis is not walking around going, I'm going to buy this. Like, it's his CPA, right? That is like, you need to buy something. These things are for sale. You need to spend $21 million. We're going to do it over here. Sound good? Sounds good. And he didn't even know that he bought it until after he bought it. But sometimes if your balance sheet, right? But Ellis also, so Lanai is minor compared to everything that he owns. He owns so much stuff in Europe. He owns like full on other islands. Like Lanai was, like the 11th island that he bought. Like it wasn't anything that special to him. Have you guys been to Catalina Island though?
Yeah.
Off of San Diego or LA?
Didn't you go scuba diving there?
Yes,
Yeah.
I go scuba diving there. But that is like a little Lanai. But it is owned by the Wrigleys, like gum.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, the Wrigley gum family. And they have a conservatory there where they've got, what do you call it? Not the Elks, but the, do you know what they're called? I forget now what they're called, but they're almost extinct. Yeah, forget it. I can't remember.
Yes.
But they're like big cow elk guys.
Yeah.
Bison.
Bison.
They're the bison. They're the bison. They're the bison. But they've got a bison conservatory there.
Huge.
Yep. But they're awesome. Big and fat and kind of
Furry.
rumpy. Yeah, very cute. Okay, everybody's back. Let's go over this. Okay. So, step one, purchase price, $500,000, down payment, $25,000. We're kind of looking at, so this is condotel, down payment, $125,000, closing costs right about $20,000. And immediate home improvement costs. So we're taking a look at a building that's pretty much ready to go. Okay. So how much are they spending? They're spending a total of $145,000. Step 2, what is the periodic payment or PMT? So assuming this is a short-term rental, assuming that they're renting at about $250 a day, okay, which is pretty conservative because depending upon the room, you can rent it for anywhere from about $150 to $400 a night, right, if you're in the Ilokai. But this one, $250, which is pretty medium of the road. So that gives you $7,500 as a gross rent. Then underneath this situation, your monthly mortgage payment's going to be $32.88. And if we take a look at the mortgage information box right below that, the mortgage balance that they borrow, because they put down 25%, is $375. The interest rate on this would be right about 9.99. Okay, and then the term is a 30-year term, so that's where we get that mortgage payment. So let's go back up to the top. So $7,500 as gross rent, $32.88 as a mortgage payment. Monthly expenses, I put $1,000 in there because let's assume that it's like a $700 or $800 maintenance fee. You got taxes, you got insurances. Okay. Vacancy loss, I put in 10% because I did talk to some property managers for short-term rentals. They said that they're running at about a 10% per month. So if they are operating 30 days a month, there's about 3 to 5 days in there where they may not be rented. Which is why, as a agent, if you're trying to sell one or show one, right, what's the biggest problem? We got to do it between. We can't have the appraiser come when somebody's in there, right? They're on vacation. Okay. And that's actually one of the biggest problems when it comes to short-term rentals is being able to get the inspectors in there because nobody wants to disturb their their nightly rentals, and and it's very hard to gauge that stuff. So even though they're like, oh, we want to close in 30 days, I'm like, can't close in 30 days if you won't let them in for 3 weeks, you know. So that's the hardest part right there. And then so that's the vacancy loss factor in the dollar amount of that 10%. So what is the net positive or negative cash flow? So in this respect, they would be making $2,462 per month. Okay.
So it is, I guess, deducted vacancy monthly, even though the 10% is annual. So the 10% is annual. Yeah, you're deducting the 10% on the month.
Mm-hmm. Because we are using a monthly rent here up top.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that's at $200, $250 per night. Okay, now, this calculation, though, is very basic, okay? But when you look at this, that is why every person who lives in the mainland who has an accountant that ran this calculation for them says, man, you got to go get yourself a short-term rental in Hawaii, okay? But then what happens when they get to Hawaii? They're like, well, yeah, but you've got this rental pool, and we've got property management, and you got to pay for a cleaner to come every single time, and you've got to, right? And then that's when they start to say, wait a minute, I thought I was going to keep $2,500 a month. This was just going to be easy peasy money. I didn't realize that there was going to be all these people involved and all of this different stuff involved. Well, why can't I just manage it myself? What's the big deal? What's the rule?
Yeah.
Can't. Unless you live in Hawaii, you cannot manage your own property. You must have an intermediary.
But they still do it.
And they still do, but that's the law, right? So when given all of the laws, they can't believe it because a lot of times in the mainland, they're not subjected to those laws. Yeah. So, let's go back to this. Hey, Ashley.
Sorry.
Okay, so step number 3. So given all of this with this basic calculation, step number 3 would be, let's say that this investor keeps it for 10 years, okay? Step number 4 would be, what is the future value? 5% appreciation. So we're just going to use 5% appreciation because what do we know about condo hotels? Do they appreciate quickly? No. Only in 2023 and 2024, right? For the rest of the time, many of them did not appreciate at all, hardly. It felt like they were almost going down in price. But the last couple of years have been very, very good for condo hotels. Sales price is going to be $814,447 if they sell in 10 years. And then the cost of the sale, we always use 8% because that's your 6% commission plus escrow costs. So that means that the cost of the sale is going to be $65,156. And then if they borrowed the $375 10 years ago, that mortgage payoff is going to be $340. So they're going to do exactly what we talked about at the beginning of this project, right? Which is 2 ways that the investor can make money is going to be monthly cash flow as well as the appreciation. Okay. Now, your goal as the real estate agent would be, even though this calculation is showing that they're making $24.62, if you can show that they're still making a little bit of profit after property management fees and all of that different stuff, then you've got a buyer, right? But if he's looking for really, really deep profits every single month, unless he's putting down substantially more than 25%, he's not going to get there. And we will look at the other stuff. We're going to take a break here shortly, but we'll look at the other stuff and we'll look at how we're going to do a loan comparison about how much they need to put down in order to make profit and where that all falls. Okay? Interest rates right now for an investor long, you saw from short-term rentals something around 10%, right? 9.99 was the last one. If you're looking at traditional long-term, you're looking at about 7.5. If you're going with a larger down payment, smaller down payment might be something just under 8% still right now for an investor. Loan term, assuming that these are 360 months or 30 years, your mortgage payment with 75% down is going to be 104882. Your 50% down is going to be 5175.21. And then here comes those points, right? Because if you are an investor, you've got closing costs right now and you've got to pay points. There's no way around it. As an owner occupant, you may be able to get away with 0 points or 1 point or less than that. But in this current market with the interest rates where they're at, all investors are going to be paying points. So they've got to be ready with their cash. Closing costs. So this is taking into consideration lending costs, escrow costs. Okay. So 75% down. If you're taking on a loan, I just put it at 10 grand to keep it nice and even. The dollar amount there is the points just coming into the equation as a dollar amount. And then monthly taxes and expenses. So again, I put it at $1,000, assuming that their maintenance fee is somewhere around $700 or $800, and then you've got taxes and insurances. And then because this is, let's say, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in Makiki, you can probably rent it for about $2,500. Okay. Now, internal rate of return. Let's take a look at that. Let's assume that your annual rate of appreciation is still 8%. Your holding period is the same that we've been using at 10 years. So if you hold this property for 10 years, it should, kind of like what you were saying, actually double in price. Okay? And then less your sales expenses of 8%. And then that next figure is just a dollar amount on that. And then the mortgage payoff, obviously if you've got cash, you've got nothing to pay off, you pocket everything. If it's 75% down, you're going to make about $1 million. If it's 50% down, you're going to make about $1 million as well, about $900,000. Okay, so let's see what happens on the right-hand side. So cash needed to close. So if it's cash, you just need the closing costs and the cash, right? If you're taking on a loan at 75% down, you're going to need about $462,000. At 50% down with all the closing costs, you're going to need about $317,500. So let's look at the cash flow and why we had to put down those different amounts. So the monthly cash flow on, if you are in a cash space, is going to be $2,500 minus your $1,000 expenses, your NOI, right? Your monthly cash flow at 75% down is going to give you $451 in profit, okay? And you could back that off a little. So let's say instead of putting 75% down, you put 70 or 65. That might give you a break even, okay? But look what happens if you get to 50% down. He's at a loss of $675 per month. That's challenging, right? And then And that's a very hard sale, which is why when you've got the typical guy from Kapolei that got a HELOC that wants to get the unit down at university, he's like, how am I supposed to make money on this thing, right? You've got to have a bigger down payment. You've got to have at least 50% or more, depending upon what your maintenance fee is, because that's a huge component factor in all of this. And we all know from maintenance fees, whatever you start at, over time, it's going to go up anyway, because buildings only get older, they don't get newer, and more problems occur, right? You may have a stable period for a little while, but for the most part, over time, it's going to be going up. So that's really where it's at right now, okay? However, look at your IRR. If you pay for it in cash, you are actually operating at a lower IRR than if you use your leverage, right? If you use a loan on this. So when you are talking to your investors, what you're going to want to talk to him about is, hey, depending upon what the maintenance fees are and things like that, let's not buy one unit in cash, right? Your IRR is going to be a little bit less. Let's see how we can spread your money around, maybe figure out a way to get 2 units. And maybe get different units in different areas, depending upon desirability of that area. One of the things that I've been noticing is, IAEA, right, used to be like, if you said you lived in IAEA, it was the same as saying that you lived in Makaha, kind of, right? Like, people would be like, way out there, But now IAEA has become this really desirable place because it's almost like the new Hawaii Kai. You're 15 minutes from the airport, half an hour to town. Like, that's pretty much what Hawaii Kai has going for it, that makes it so. Obviously, there's no marina there, but they do have the ocean that pushes up against it right there. And the new restaurants, you guys were talking about the new restaurant that just opened up. They just opened a Little Joe's Steakhouse over there, So it's really getting built up. The rail runs through it. So we'll see what happens. And then what's happening with the stadium?
They're going to build
a brand new one. Right? So when that comes up, all those houses around there are going to start to pick up value. So we're going to see a lot of changes in Oahu, and believe it or not, as much as we like to hate on the rail or love the rail, it's all based on some of these changes that have happened with our infrastructure, right? And the fact that, like when you go out to, my hairdresser is in Eva. And so I actually left here one night. It was like 6 p.m. I made my appointment at 7 because I was thinking I can get out there very easily by 7.
At
and
6
I was
o'clock?
still, and I was still stuck in traffic. And the red lights were just crazy. But that's because there's not enough roads, right? So things like the rail are going to come up. But it's true.
There's enough road. There's just too many cars.
There's too many cars. Exactly.
Ride the rail.
Exactly. So we'll see what happens, but there's a lot of change happening, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so that is a condo. Now let's look at houses. Okay, so this one is Awesome Investor SFR Detached, Single Family Residence Detached. So when folks want to talk about property types, they always ask me, well, what's the difference between a townhouse and a condominium? They're different, right? Technically, in lending, they're the same. You're either detached, meaning that no walls are touching your walls, including a shared carport, okay? Versus attached walls or touching somebody else, okay? The reason why that's significant is because if you are standing alone, 100% detached, what do you share with other people? Nothing. You just take care of yourself, right? What happens if you're in a townhome or a condominium and you are attached to somebody else?
You do have shared walls.
You have shared many things, amenities, walls, and on top of that, if you are sharing roofs, right? If one side of the roof goes bad, they're gonna fix the whole roof because they know the rest of it's gonna go. And then on top of that, you now have a master insurance policy, a board, all of that different stuff that are playing into all of that different stuff for the many reasons that we just talked about. So if it's So that's the easiest way to look at it, is just look at the property, and if it is attached or touching anybody else in any way, it's attached. If it is 100% freestanding, you can just see, green all the way around it, then it's detached. All right, so this is 123 Kapolei Way. And then same thing, we've got the cash. Now this one, your break-even point is gonna be much different, okay? So 50% down, and we won't go through all of this stuff because I know we're running out of time, but let's jump over to the cash needed to close. So cash needed to close, $1 million versus the 518 versus the 327 for 30% down. Look at where your break-even point is for a single family, right about 50%. Okay, but anything less than that is going to get you into a substantial loss situation. But same thing, by using the bank's money, you can actually increase your IRR by leveraging that. Okay, and then this would be on a house that your mortgage payments, including everything, right about, so this is based on rent, so you're renting it for $4,500, and your mortgage payment, so for the 50% down, $3496.07, plus your maintenance fees, or in this situation wouldn't be maintenance fees, it would be your taxes and your insurances. And I'm using $400 for your property taxes and $250 for your insurances, assuming that you're in a particular neighborhood. So with that being said, your break-even point on a single family is right about 50%. Whereas on a condominium, long-term, it's going to be about 75% with these current interest rates.
So you know how in this example, in the last example, you had the holding period of 10 years stacked?
Mm-hmm.
So then how is it that we're coming up with the sales price of the property in the future for 10 years? That's that future value formula for
It's the appreciation at 8% per year.
So where are we getting 8%?
It's just a number that we're using, but a lot of it's just a number that we chose for our examples. Mm-hmm. But depending upon your neighborhood,
right,
it could be whatever it is. So if you are in a desirable neighborhood, we're still about 8%. But if you are in a less desirable neighborhood, you're probably looking at 4 to 5%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. But Kapolei is considered a desirable neighborhood right now.
Okay. I'm just noticing in 10 years we have the price doubling, which historically is usually 20.
That's based upon the calculation at 8%.
Makes sense.
And then obviously appreciation goes like this too.
Right.
Yeah, but we cannot, if we were to build all of that in, actually, we'd be here like all day just talking about the one thing.
With our
So we gotta move on.
scientific calculation.
Exactly. And we need a much bigger spreadsheet. Okay, so let's go to the next steps. Okay, so we were talking about the different keys to profitability. We talked about leverage. Now we're going to talk about liquidity. So what is liquidity? The ability to quickly convert an investment into cash. So recognize that real estate equity is not liquid. How come real estate equity is not liquid? I thought that if I had $1 million house, that I could just say I have $1 million.
Well, it takes time to sell. You also have a bunch of fees, and then a lot of times there's maybe things in the way of being able to sell.
Yep.
So unless the cash is liquid, it's technically not liquidity.
Exactly. And we see that a lot. So that's in a sales situation, right? That's exactly true. You may have $1 million asset, but unless you've got a buyer and they're qualified and going to closing, technically, you don't have any money in your pocket, right? You're still broke.
Right.
And many of us in this room have represented a seller that when you say, hey, Mr. Seller, I'd like to leave your house, and I recommend that we order an appraisal so we don't leave any money on the table, what do they say? I'm not spending the $600, forget that, right? So sometimes the seller doesn't even have enough money for the termite report, right? Depending on what their situation is. They gotta have it paid out of escrow because they can't come up with the $250.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So it really just depends on your situation. And then we have a lot of folks that are trapped in their equity, meaning that they live in the home, it's free and clear, but they can't get a loan for the life of them to get the cash out. We know many people like that, right? So so that's why real estate equity is not liquid. And then what happens if the market's fluctuating? One day it's $1 million.
Yeah.
Next day it's 900, right? So what is that number? So until the equity is withdrawn in the form of cash, it's not considered liquid cash. So that's number one. Number two is going to be maintain sizable cash cushion for the investor. Weather ups and weather downs, so that's more of a mainland thing. But here we have a lot of deferred maintenance due to just rain and stuff like that, right? One of the things that I learned from Susavio was that insurance is easier to get on wood-framed buildings or units rather than cement.
That was interesting, wasn't it?
Mhm. Why do you guys think that?
It's easier
Cheaper
to
to
get it
rebuild.
on because it's easier to rebuild. Yeah.
It's not necessarily that it's easier to rebuild, but water and wood are kind of friends, right? They kind of put up with each other a little bit. But water and cement are definitely not friends. The minute the wood starts to rot a little bit, you can reinforce it. But once the water gets into that cement, there's no way to, goes into spalling and goes into all of those different things. And the building starts to rot from within and you cannot see it until it's too late. So that's why insurance is actually harder to get on concrete buildings than it is for wood buildings, which is one of the things that made me cry just a little bit. So, weather ups and weather downs, seize opportunities, right? So once again, when you are being an investor, if you've got your cash ready, you can do more. What happens if you present a contract with a contingency? Oh, I can buy it. I just need to sell my house first, right? What happens to that offer?
They're gonna go lower.
They're gonna exactly. Well, they're not gonna be as desirable as somebody that doesn't have a bunch of things hinging on their stuff, right? If somebody's got their cash ready, and that's why many of the contracts that we're losing to are cash, because they've got cash, and for some reason, and we've got to get a loan or whatever the case may be. Larger mortgages and less cash, so that goes into liquid. And then never be 100% invested. What does that mean?
Don't put all your eggs
Oh,
in
because
one
it'll
basket.
never come. Doesn't always
that's
come
true.
true.
Yep. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't spend all of your last penny on that too good to be true situation.
The
right?
cash poor, ramen rich thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Key number 4, determine marketability. The steps and costs required to rent out or sell a property. Okay? Cost to carry. What happens when you're switching out a tenant? I told you the story about my condo, right? And how I reduced the guy's rent. Why did I do that? If I reduce his rent by $200 a month, that is $2,400 a year. If I'm renting that unit for $2,500 a month and it sits vacant for 2 months,
While you're looking for a new
that's
tenant.
$5,000.
Yeah.
Plus, I gotta renovate it, clean it, fix it, blah, 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 market it, all that stuff. It makes more sense to just work with the guy that I've got, reduce his rent, and keep everything status quo than get super greedy, try to kick him out, get somebody in there, and for all I know, I could get somebody in to keep reducing my rent again, right? And the next thing you know, I'm in the same exact space, but maybe the guy isn't as neat this time. Maybe I got a dirty hoarder guy in there. There's a unit in our building that it's on the market, and somebody was coming, one of our clients actually was trying to buy it, and I was like, how come you guys aren't going into contract? What's going on? And they're like, we can't go see it. They're like, why? Somebody's in there that they said that whatever, they're hoarding or whatever, but their boxes and stuff are like this high, and you can't even like walk through the building, the unit. So, depending upon who you've got in there, very, very different situation. Brokerage fees, same things. Riley, when you are swapping out a unit, how much do you charge your owner?
Wait, swapping out?
Yeah. So when you have a vacancy and you're swapping out the tenant, how much are you charging them to swap it out?
Yeah, leasing fee is also 10%.
Yeah. No.
Okay, but don't you charge them the lump sum of the rent the first month when they're swapping out?
No.
Oh, that's interesting.
I've heard the 10% thing too, because I wanted to break a lease, and they told me that I'd have to pay the 10% for the property management, having to do open houses and this and that to find another tenant and replace them. They were going to charge me the 10% instead of the seller because I wanted to break the lease, and they were going to allow me to.
Okay. Well,
I charge
so
a reducing
sorry.
fee.
what I can tell you is that that's pretty unusual. Okay, because to 10% to list, show that thing 25 times, all that stuff. So let's say it's a $3,000 unit. That's only $300. So you're telling me, Riley, that to swap out a new tenant, show that place 25 times before it gets rented, do all that paperwork that you're only charging them $300?
Yeah.
Oh wow! Call Riley. That is unusual. Every property manager that I talk to, except for Riley, will charge you 1 to 2 months of the rent to swap out that tenant. Most of them are 1, but if you're going with the company that promises hands-off service, you're going to go with 2 months. But usually 1 month rent, so $3,000 plus your monthly 10%.
Actually, never heard of that.
I've never heard
So-
of that.
Yeah, I've actually never heard what you're saying.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that either.
I've rented my house.
Change your
and-
property. You're a property manager too.
Yeah.
Tell them what you do.
I was a Coldwell banker for a short stint, and they have this arm that does property management. They charge the full rent, like you're saying.
So the full rent might be.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
That would be if I would do that if I'm not going to manage the property throughout the lease. If I'm just going to help them find the renter, then I'll charge a full month's rent. But then I won't be managing the property. Just to find a renter, yeah, full month's rent. But if I'm managing the property and collecting that 10% every month, then yeah, it's only an additional 10% in the month.
I charge a $500 flat fee, and I only do open houses, and I only have a small window, and I don't make any appointments. You come, you have an hour and a half to come. Everybody come,
I think
Everybody come at once.
and I rent it the same day.
Yeah.
Done.
that sounds reasonable, $500.
So I think that things have changed over the last couple of years because the real estate market has been slow, right? So now we've got folks that are willing to work for a little bit less because, but the reality of it is almost every property management company that I've spoken with, and it has been a number of years because I've been doing my own property management, but they always would quote the same, which would be 1 month rent to swap out the tenant, and then from there you usually negotiate the monthly, right? 7, 8, or 10% depending upon the company.
So I just did what you were talking about with the rental thing for our our other house in Portland, and so we basically got $200 off of the rent over there because we figured that it would take the property management or property owner another month to show it, right? And then and to get another tenant. And so then that would mean that they would lose out on that amount.
Yeah.
However, if they just gave us $200 off, they were going to be in the positive still by a couple $100 instead of losing out. So it took some negotiation, but we got the discount.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we did the same math.
Yeah.
Judy, you should have just called me. My turnover is 2 weeks.
Well, the reality of it is they still charge you the full month, even if they get it rented in 1 day. It's about their service. It's about their service, them listing, them responding to the Craigslist or your HRN or whatever you are, doing it in, or their list of tenants or whatever that they've got pending. So, but clearly what we've learned from this conversation is it differs, right, from company to company. If you are going with a company like Coldwell Banker, you may have a different situation.
I'm not with Coldwell.
I was just referring to your statement. But you may have a different experience than if you go with a private person. But at the same time, there may be different things included in all of that. Right? Meaning rent facilitation, maintenance situations that occur, right? Some property managers I've even heard are like, I'm not working from Friday until Sunday. Right? If you pay a little bit less, you may have that situation. If you pay a little bit more, they may be taking phone calls at 2 in the morning. So it really just depends on service. And even in the real estate space, some people charge 3%, some people charge 2%, some people say, crap that, I'll do it for 1%. And then you got this, all the companies that are doing flat fee, right? Mm-hmm. So it really just depends on what your level of service is. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever sold with like Jeffrey Samuels or one of those flat fees. Well, when they take you in, they tell you all the bells and whistles. We do everything just like everybody else. And then when you ask them for an open house, they're like, we don't do open houses.
You're gonna do open house.
They're like-
You're gonna do the
and, then, and I'm like, well, how are you going to show the property? I don't show the
Yeah,
property.
you do.
Showtime does.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So, it really just makes a difference on who your representation is and how much they're going to charge you to do all of that stuff, right? And then even within all of that, you've got the different spins. I'll throw in the staging. I'm going to charge $1,000 a month for staging. I mean, it just depends, right? So yeah, it just depends. Okay, so brokerage fees, advertising fees, title insurance, and then transfer taxes. So these are just some examples of some of the things that you may come into contact with when you're trying to swap out tenants or remarket the property. Evaluate investment management issues. Okay, so steps and costs required to manage, measure, and improve the performance of the property. So asset management, it's going to be regular consultant with advisors to evaluate investment performance versus other opportunities. And also property management, where you've got physical maintenance and tenant issues. So when it comes to buildings, kind of like we were talking about with the condominium buildings, they have a report that comes out every single year. It's called a reserve study. Everybody knows what a reserve study is when you call when you order your condo docs? Okay. And that's what they're talking about there, right? Is consulting advisors to take a look at your situation and say, based upon the trend that you're at, right? And this mostly just comes back to budgeting, right? Based upon the trend that you're at, where will you be next year, or where will you be in 10 years? And if you know that you've got to come up with $30 million for plumbing in 2028, what are you guys doing today to get there, right? Reserve study could be an example of asset management. And then, of course, property management, we talked about whether you use a property management company or whether you self-manage. Okay, item number 6, consider the tax impact. So, income taxes and capital gains taxes. So remember, our third class that we're having here, March 21st, is going to speak deeply into capital gains and income taxes. Come if you will. Just kidding. But anyway, so tax credits, depreciation, which you brought up earlier, Ashley, right, is one of the line items in your Schedule E. So when you file your taxes, what schedule is it that your real estate shows up on? E like Edward, okay? That's if you have investment property, okay? If you have a primary residence, it'll show up in A, I think, right?
Correct.
Yes, okay. And then
If it even qualifies.
exactly, if it qualifies, exactly. That's for the other class. But tax credits, so any credits that you may have coming through your tax returns that you can implement and apply to your situation. Depreciation, that's a line item, and that's a calculation that's performed 27.5 years. And then 1031 exchanges. What's a 1031 exchange?
It's a tax deferment tool.
Mm-hmm. It's an investment tax deferment tool. Can you just do a 1031 exchange with anybody?
It would have to be as long as it's like for like properties, or what I call like for like plus.
Yes.
With a
So,
QA.
I'm sorry?
With a QA.
Yes, you've
With
got to have an
facilitator.
intermediary.
Yeah, facilitator.
Okay, you've got to have an intermediary, which is the facilitator. And what most people don't know is there is a forward 1031 exchange, which is the one that we're used to, right? Which is where you sell the property, hold the proceeds, and then you go use them to buy something else. That's forward. And there's also a reverse, where you acquire the property first, and then they hold the money, and then you go buy your next you sell your next property. So, can you get a loan on a reverse?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
We
believe
can go higher. Oh, wait.
really.
A reverse mortgage?
It wouldn't be collateralized.
Reverse 1031.
Nope, you cannot get a mortgage on a reverse 1031 exchange. And the reason why is because the monies and the title are never in the individual's name. They're always held in the intermediary's name, into the facilitator's name. So that's why you cannot get a mortgage on a reverse 1031 exchange, only on the forward 1031 exchange, because the money's already available. Okay, so that's why we'll lend on that. But if the money's not available yet and we're waiting for the money to come forward and the title of the property is technically in somebody else's name, that doesn't meet the requirements for minimizing risk and a good lending prospect for the bank. Okay, so 1031 exchanges, and what you brought up, Ashley, is correct, which is it must be like to like property, and when we say that, we're talking about purchase price like. Okay, you can exchange. So what we mean by that is that if you are selling a house on the North Shore for $1 million, you can go to Hawaii Kai and buy a house for $1 million. That's like to like property. If you sold 2 units at the Ono Vista for $500 each and went and bought $1 million house in Hawaii Kai, that's still like to like because it's $1 million to $1 million. Okay, you can buy underneath that, but then whatever amount you don't use or you don't meet becomes taxable. So the purpose of a 1031 exchange is to make it not taxable. But I do have a client right now, they're doing a 1031 exchange. They sold a property in California. They're getting $800,000, but they're only using 5 for the 1031 exchange because they want to keep $300 for themselves. And they are going to get taxed on it, but they're fine. That's because they want the cash, right? So you can break it up that way. I also had a situation where it was a 1031 exchange. Mom and son bought a property together, and the son wanted to take the money out and go buy himself a primary residence, which you cannot do, right? It's got to be investment to investment.
Yeah.
But the mom wanted to roll hers over. So when they did the sale, the son took his money, paid taxes on his stuff, and did his stuff with his new house, and then the mom took hers, rolled it over, and turned it in. So they did a half and half. Go ahead.
Half and half.
Was I gonna say
Half and half. So yeah, so you can. It's just whatever portion you don't use or whatever portion you don't meet on the requirement becomes taxable. But as long as you're able to digest those taxes, then you will be able to kind of.
Now I remember what I was gonna say. So it would also be opportunistic for, like, say, if someone had to pay the capital gains on something for a single person, keep it in the $250,000 or less, because that's their single person exemption for investment, right? Or is that just for primary?
It's
No,
that
that's
is
for
your
primary,
homeowner's exemption
Only for
for
primary.
primary
Okay.
residences only. Anything investment is going to hit your
No matter what.
Yes, no matter what.
Okay.
And if you come to the tax class, that'll also make you cry a little bit. Okay, go ahead.
What's the time frame
actually
for the
didn't
reverse
know.
exchange?
It has to be primary.
It's the same.
Yeah, I think that's
So
what
they're
it
still the
was
same.
about.
45 days to identify, 6 months to close. I was actually teaching a 1031 exchange class once, and there was a gentleman sitting there, and he says to me, I'm like, yeah, 45 days to identify property, 6 months to close. And he's like, no, that's not true. And I'm like,
You can
really?
Google it.
Well, he goes, no, that's not true. He goes, I've been in a 1031 exchange for 2 years.
Whoa.
And I was like,
Whoa.
when was the last time you talked to your escrow officer? And he was like, I don't know, when we did the sale. And I was like, you need to call him right now because you're definitely not in the 1031
No.
exchange anymore. And so next thing you know, at the next break, he was outside fighting with his seller because he gave him the wrong information. But it just goes to show you that if you're not educated about stuff, you can make really bad mistakes and have really angry people.
So say that you work with a facilitator, you declare that you're going to do a 1031, yet it takes you, say, 4 months to sell your property, right? Then would you be able to go to your facilitator and say, you know what, hey, I'm not going to do a 1031 exchange, but then later, and just take it off the market, right? And just be like, hey, I'm going to take it off the market for now. But then later decide to do a 1031 exchange and are you allowed to just be like, no, I don't want to anymore because of the time that passes? Or once you're already committed, then you can't take that off the market?
You can take it off. Well, so that's a loaded question. So, so remember when you are engaged. So somebody's got to start the clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you start the clock? You sign paperwork.
Right.
Okay. So, and let's not even talk about the 6 months because it really is, because it's easy to close in 6 months, right? The problem is identifying the property in 45 days. And it's not just looking on the MLS and be like, I want to buy that one. It is actually getting into contract and being able to meet those requirements. So once you sign that documentation and you say, yes, I'm going to engage in this, I've got 45 days to get you another purchase contract, the clock has already started.
You
So-
can't cancel the clock and be like, nah, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, you can, but number one, the facilitator is probably going to charge you money anyway. He's not going to just say, well,
Well, I mean, they
that
didn't
was-
work. They should, if they
Yeah,
failed.
yeah. So he's gonna still charge you.
Yeah.
But then your clock ends,
Uh-huh.
okay, and everything and escrow closes. So remember, you're opening, even though it's with a facilitator, you're opening and closing an escrow.
Right.
So if your property doesn't sell, you decide that you want to close that escrow, that's fine, but you would have to restart it and do the whole thing over again. You can't like intermingle them or refer back to an old date,
Got it.
right? It would be that it's just like your purchase contract. You either met your contingency date or you didn't. And with 1031 exchange, unfortunately, there's no extensions. Yeah. So that's the other thing.
Good to know.
Yeah. But that gives me an idea. I think that on our taxation class, I'm going to have one of the facilitators. Maybe I can get Julia. Everybody knows Julia. Maybe I can get her to do like a little 10-minute thing for us. Yeah, I'll talk to Old Republic about it. See if we
She's
can.
the best.
She is the best. She is. Fidelity has a pretty good team too, but Julia's been around forever, so she knows all the
She's
tricks.
been around longer.
Yeah, exactly. But she changed her last name, so nobody can find her. But yeah, so it would be the opening and the closing, and then if you took it off the market and then you just waited a while and then started again, but you'd still have to meet the same requirements.
Right.
Yep. Yep. Okay. All right. Tax impact, passive, active, and portfolio income. So that basically is just talking about your real estate, your W-2 income, right? What is passive income? Money you make while you're sleeping. Yep. What is active income?
You got to go to work.
Put on your badge and go to work. Put on your shoes and go, right? And then portfolio income is going to be your stocks and all that different stuff. Okay. Item number 7, understand and calculate investment risk. Vacancy factor, right? Very real, depending upon the desirability of your unit and the building. Lease expiration risk. So what happens when your lease expires here in Hawaii? Generally, depending upon what you put on your rental agreement.
Month to month.
Moves to month, okay? Can you break a lease if they're not month to month?
I mean, yeah, you can.
Penalty.
Yeah. Well, it just depends on what
Depends.
your tenant is willing to do, right? Sometimes you get lucky and you send your tenant a letter that says, hey, I want to sell the property. I know you're in the middle of your lease, but how do you feel about moving out? And that guy doesn't know the tenant, bylaws, and he's just like, oh man, I'm in the middle of my lease and the landlord gave me a letter, I gotta move, right? And then they just move, okay? Sometimes they steadfast and they're like, nope. I talked to somebody and the tenant, the tenant landlord code says that you cannot break my lease unless you pay me out, unless you do this, right? And the next thing you know, you're paying him $36,000 to move, right? Or whatever it is. So lease expiration risk, credit risk of the tenant, okay? So there are situations, obviously if you're working with a great property manager or even if you're self-managing and you've got a way to check credit and do all of that stuff, then you can assess the risk. But what if you had a tenant in there and something changes? What happens if you had a couple in there, everything was fine, and then now they're breaking up, getting divorced? And one of them wants to stay in the unit, which they both qualified for, right? And many times when they do that, do they tell the landlord? Do they call the tenant landlord and say, we're divorcing and I'm only working with half of the income now, can I stay here? They don't tell you anything, right? Usually you don't hear anything. Who tells you? The neighbors. I haven't seen that lady around recently. I think just the guy is here, right? And he's had a lot of friends on Friday nights, right? But whatever. But usually it's the neighbors that rat you out, right? They tell you about your property. They tell on you about your property, right? Just like when people were doing illegal short-term rentals, who was ratting them out? The neighbors, right? Because city and county isn't driving around knowing what's going on. They're responding to the complaints. So credit risk of the tenant, which can change. And it can change in that setting that we talked about, a divorce. It can change in job loss. It can change in something like depression that comes on, an illness that comes on, right? They're diagnosed with something, all of a sudden their situation changes. So a lot of things can change the credit risk of the tenant. Risk of, and then of course the risk of carrying these increasing costs as they go on. And then we also talk about maintenance fees increase and all that stuff. So 3 ways to reduce risk. Number one is going to be your rent to own or sale leaseback strategy, which is awful, but we'll cover it anyway. Investment diversification, just not putting all your eggs in one basket, and then having that cash cushion so that when things come up, you can digest it. Okay, so this is not something that I've seen in Hawaii. Let's put it that way. So this is the rent to own strategy where Trish, the tenant, picks out a property. Ingrid, the investor, purchases the property for Trish and then rents it back to her in the form of a rent to own. So that doesn't usually happen in Hawaii, right? I mean, have you guys ever heard of anybody buddying up with a tenant and being like, hey, I'm going to find a property for you. Why don't you go choose your perfect property and I'm going to buy it for you and then you can live in it and then I'll rent it back to you and then we can do a rent to, okay, that's not working in Hawaii, right? But we do have rent to own situations. We don't have them much now because generally those only take place when what is happening? Property values are going down, right? When property values are, when you take on a rent to own lease, what happens? Can somebody tell me how rent to own works? Okay.
I mean,
Generally, did you want to say?
how rent to own works?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the state. You're renting to own it. It's like a lease back with a car, right? In a way.
Like a
Sort of.
small
Okay.
portion
So
of your
generally,
rent goes towards either what the down payment would be, or it somehow goes towards paying for the purchase price of the home.
Right.
Percentage.
So generally what happens, an example would be, okay, is that property values are going down and you want to lock in a certain purchase price because you don't want to lose any more money. That's the premise of a rent to own, right? Is, hey, I've got a tenant right now that loves where they live. They want to buy it from me. They want to buy it from me at $500,000, but my neighbor just sold for $475, so I'm going to get $500 from this guy. Okay, and then you contract it at $500,000 in the form of a lease of rent to own, and then like you said, Ashley, let's say that the rent is $2,000 a month, and then you signed in a contract. Every month when you pay $2,000 to me, I will take 1,500, and then 500 will go into an escrow account to be held and used towards your down payment. And then that lease to own agreement will generally be for a certain time frame, right? Like 2 years or 5 years or what have you, okay? And that's the way a lease to own works. But the seller's incentive to do that is they're getting what they refer to as an easy sale, right? They don't have to market it, get a realtor, nothing. They can just sign it with their tenant. And they speculate that they're not going to be making any more money off of this home because homes are depreciating, so they might as well lock in that $500,000 when they can. Tell you a story. So there was a couple. This was right before that was like during mortgage meltdown when everybody was losing their equity. Okay, there was a couple. They were living in a house on the beach in Kailua. And they were in a rent to own for, I forget what it was because this was a few years ago, something like $350. Okay.
Wow.
And they wrote it for 5 years. And as it turned out, the seller had contracted it for that $350. It was a single woman that had kind of like lost her husband, so she was just kind of like, I'm going to do everything that I can, lock these people in, get as much money as I can. Anyway, so she contracted that. The couple inside had 5 years to put their financing together. They called me 6 months before it was over. So 4.5 years into it. And I said to them, well, how come you never got the financing before? And they're like, well, our credit was terrible. And so I pulled their credit and I'm like, well, your credit's still terrible. And I'm like, well, how are we going to get this done? In the 6 months, which seems like a long time, but if you've got credit repair coming from, 400 FICO scores trying to get them back up to 620, which is their minimum lending score, you've got to make some major moves, okay? So, and they were up against the clock, and the seller was doing everything in the universe to not consummate the sale because the houses had gone from 350 to freaking 800 in those 5 years, right? And so she was doing everything to get out of that sale. And so the people are in my office every single day and they're so nervous and they can't put it together and they can't qualify and they can't do this and their credit's terrible. And on top of that, the seller, who was supposed to be putting that $500 into the down payment account, wasn't
Spent
doing
the
it. She was
money.
spending the money. So when we were like, "Where's their down payment?" she was like, "What down payment?" So now they had no down payment, horrible credit, couldn't get a loan, could not qualify income-wise for that loan, and then we had to put all of that stuff together. And then on top of that, the buyer, who had dragged their feet for 4.5 years, was doing more of the same, right, in that 6 months. So it was very challenging to get them qualified, get their credit up to par, all of that stuff. I think we closed like 2 weeks before that situation. And we were able, because of the rent-to-own lease, we were able to take the proceeds from the seller for the down payment. Which, can you, in a traditional situation,
Oh my God.
can
You
can
cannot.
the seller give down payment? No,
No.
they cannot. They can give credit, but they cannot give down payment, okay? But because of that lease, and she spent the money, we were able to get the proceeds in the form of the down payment. So, very convoluted situation. And we have not really I have not come across another rent-to-own since I performed that transaction, because in Hawaii, the property values are going up. So why would someone get into a lease to own if they know that they'll probably be able to sell it for more later or the year after that? So that's why that doesn't work. And then this definitely, isn't happening in Hawaii. So rent to own and sale leaseback cautions. So foreclosure laws vary from state to state. Eviction laws vary from state to state. Carrying costs if the tenant walks away, and then risk to tenant if the investor defaults on the mortgage. And that's actually something that was happening during mortgage meltdown, right? A lot of folks were going into foreclosure and their tenants were getting the knock on the door. So they'd be sitting in there paying their rent, la-di-di-da, and the next thing you know, the sheriff's at the door offering papers and doing all of that stuff. So, Investor Connect program. So many agents are doing this. I'm sure many of you in your companies are working with folks that are pulling them in, putting them on a flight, taking them to Vegas, and selling a property, right? So many real estate agents are moving into a group investor connection kind of a space. In fact, have you guys heard of meetup.com? It's not a dating site, even though it sounds like it. It's an activity-based site or group collaboration kind of a site. And you can type in anything. You can type in surfing, yoga on a surfboard, 10 groups will come up. Cycling, 10 groups will come. 25, 30 groups will come up on cycling. Hiking, 50 groups come up. Real estate investment, 25 groups will come up. So if you've never used meetup.com, go on there and just pump it in, and it's got a good underwater basket weaving, whatever you want. There's a group for that, okay? Some of them now have started to put like age restrictions or credential restrictions. I'm doing an investment group, but it's only for realtors, right? We don't want a bunch of randos coming in here wasting everybody's time. We only want serious investors here. So just go into meetup.com. Check it out. There's so many different things, but that's a very popular place where I've seen a lot of these investor groups meeting, and they'll have full-on meetings, right? Like monthly meetings at the community center in Mililani, or monthly meetings wherever, and then that's where real estate agents or common investors can come together, pool their monies, and then go buy something. So all of that has different layers of risk in there too, because you never know who your partner's going to be, especially if it's somebody that you don't know. We've all heard horror stories about being married to somebody and then having to offload your property or get somebody off title. Now, just that was somebody that you were in love with, right? Somebody that you cared about. Just imagine if you had that same problem with somebody that you didn't even know. And you could get into a situation with a partner, pool your monies, do whatever, and then that guy's getting divorced, right? And because you didn't properly protect your file, now his wife's coming after your property. So there's a bunch of different ways that can play out. So, but it is popular to pool your investment monies and buy something. It is popular to put a bunch of investors together, get them on a plane, ship them out to Vegas, and have them all buy property over there or wherever you want to take them. But they've got pretty cool stuff. And then some of them will contract like private flights. They'll serve drinks. They'll do all kinds of stuff to jazz them up and get them out there. Tenant to homeowner programs. So Clients that can't qualify for traditional financing, so this would be again like a lease to own. Committed and able to reestablish credit over 2 to 3 years. So that was what I just told you, that story, right? They had 5 years and they didn't do anything about it. And then 5% available for non-refundable deposits. So this can be a component, but just like anything else in real estate, it's all a negotiation, right? It's whatever you negotiate. Did you get the seller's credit? I don't know. Did your realtor ask, right? Did you get a discount? I don't know. Did they ask, right? Who's paying for the inspections? I don't know. What's written in the contract? It's all about how you negotiate it. Everything's up for negotiation. All right, so these are the 7 keys of profitability: the leverage, the rate of return, the liquidity, the marketability, the management, the tax impact, and the risk. All right, predictable results if you follow that scale.